What would you do if you found out that the person who hates you most in this world just heard your deepest secret? Pause. And what if that secret was the only thing keeping that person alive? Isabella thought she had hung up. She thought she was safe to finally fall apart. For 48 minutes, she sobbed. For 48 minutes, she confessed to crimes, sacrifices, and an obsessive love for the man who called her a traitor. But what she didn't know, whispered voice, is that Mikhail Volkov, the most ruthless mafia boss I've ever known, was still on the line. He heard every sob. He heard every "I love you" whispered into the void. Here is the translation of the teaser into English, maintaining the Evelyn after midnight persona. Mysterious, intimate, and chilling. High-voltage teaser. The 48-minute confession. Midnight to 3 o'clock. Midnight to 0:20. The initial impact, sound. Absolute silence, followed by the sound of a match striking. Deep feminine breath. The sound of heavy rain begins to swell slowly. What would you do if you found out that the person who hates you most in this world just heard your deepest secret? Pause. And what if that secret was the only thing keeping that person alive? 0:20 to 1 o'clock, the error hook, sound. Static telephone interference. A persistent phone call beep that won't disconnect. Isabella thought she had hung up. She thought she was safe to finally fall apart. For 48 minutes, she sobbed. For 48 minutes, she confessed to crimes, sacrifices, and an obsessive love for the man who called her a traitor. But what she didn't know, whispered voice, is that Mikhail Volkov, the most ruthless mafia boss I've ever known, was still on the line. He heard every sob. He heard every "I love you" whispered into the void. 1 to 1:45. The imminent danger, sound. Rhythmic suspense music like a fast-ticking clock. Tonight, I'm taking you inside an absurd story. A story of betrayal, forced marriages, and a vendetta that stained the Black Sea red. I'm Evelyn, and this is my best friend's story. A woman who agreed to marry a monster to save the man she loved, never knowing that man was listening to her sacrifice in real time, while carrying a gun intended to kill her. Tonight, you'll find out what happened when Mikhail finally showed up at the altar. You'll hear the confession that changed the fate of two rival families. And most importantly, you'll understand why Isabella hasn't been seen in public since that night. Long pause. You think you know the meaning of possessive love? You haven't seen anything yet. Settle in. Dim the lights. Check that your microphone is truly off. Because what I'm about to tell you shouldn't leave this room. Welcome to Evelyn After Midnight. Let's begin. Welcome back. I'm so glad you could join me. Settle in. Turn off the lights. Lock your doors. Tonight I'm not here to talk about myself. I have something different for you. Something absurd, terrifying, and deeply intriguing. Tonight I'm going to tell you the story of my best friend, Isabella. It's a story that sounds like a fever dream, but I lived through every frantic phone call and every heartbeat of it. It's a tale about the shadows that live in the human heart and the devastating price of a secret kept for far too long. In our world, silence isn't just a virtue. It's a life insurance policy. And Isabella, she was about to pay the ultimate premium. Isabella grew up under the iron wing of the Volkov family, specifically under the predatory gaze of Mikhail Volkov. Mikhail, a man who doesn't smile, a man who rules the ports with a blood-stained fist and a mind as cold as a Siberian winter. Isabella was his ward, the orphan of one of his most loyal soldiers. But for anyone watching closely, it was obvious she was so much more. She was the only soft spot on a suit of armor made of titanium. She lived for 5 years in that gray mansion, surrounded by bodyguards and oppressive luxury. Mikhail treated her with a calculated distance. He gave her jewels, haute couture dresses, and the best tutors, but he never, not once, gave her what she craved most, a look of human recognition. To Mikhail, showing affection was a mortal sin. In the Mafia code, what you love can be used against you. So he kept her in a golden cage, protected but profoundly alone. I remember her visiting me sometimes. She had this look. A mix of devotion and terror. She loved Mikhail with an intensity that bordered on madness. She knew every one of his habits. The way he drank his whiskey neat at 3 a.m., the way he cleaned his Beretta when he was tense, the scent of expensive tobacco and sandalwood that clung to the furniture when he walked by. She loved him in secret, hiding her feelings behind a mask of perfect obedience. But fate, that cruel screenwriter, decided to put her love to the ultimate test. Julian Varga, Mikhail's greatest rival, a man of chaos and zero scruples, found what Mikhail was trying so hard to hide. He realized that to destroy the king of the underworld, he didn't need more soldiers. He only needed Isabella. Julian wasn't subtle. He intercepted Isabella's car on a cloudy afternoon. He didn't hurt her physically. He just showed her a tablet with files, bank data, GPS coordinates, and names of moles. It was a blueprint for a coordinated massacre. If Isabella didn't agree to marry Julian, sealing a fake alliance that would hand over half of the Volkov territory, Mikhail would be dead in less than 48 hours. "Choose, little bird," Julian said with a smile that made her skin crawl. "Either you become my queen and Mikhail lives, hating you for your betrayal, or you stay with him and pick the color of the flowers for his casket." Isabella didn't hesitate. For the life of the man she loved, she agreed to become the villain. She returned to the mansion and, that same night, declared before all of Mikhail's captains that she was leaving. She lied. She said Mikhail was a tedious tyrant, that she was tired of being his porcelain doll, and that Julian Varga offered her the power she deserved. Mikhail's reaction was devastating. He didn't scream. He just went pale, his gray eyes turning into blades of ice. He called her a traitor. He said in front of everyone that she was nothing more than a high-end commodity switching owners. Every word he spoke was a whip crack to Isabella's soul, but she kept her chin up. She needed him to hate her. Only his hatred would keep her safe far away from him. The wedding day arrived. Julian's mansion was decorated with vulgar opulence. Isabella was in a guest room, wearing a wedding dress that felt as heavy as lead. She hadn't eaten, she hadn't slept. Then her phone rang. It was him. Mikhail. He called to pour out his final drop of venom. "I only called to say I'll be watching your wedding, Isabella. I'm going to watch you give yourself to my enemy, and I will remember every moment I spent protecting a serpent like you. You are the greatest disappointment of my life." Isabella listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. When he hung up, or when she thought he had hung up, her world collapsed. She didn't realize the call hadn't ended. Perhaps it was panic, perhaps it was fate. The phone was tossed onto the bed with the microphone wide open, catching everything. That was when my phone rang. It was Isabella. She needed to talk to someone before she walked down the aisle to Julian. I answered, and what I heard was the sound of a soul being torn apart. "Evelyn, I don't know if I can take another step." She sobbed, her voice echoing in her room, and consequently into Mikhail's phone, which was still live on the bed. "Mikhail. He just called me. He hates me, Evelyn. He hates me with everything he has. He thinks I'm a traitor, that I'm greedy." She started pacing. I could hear the rustle of the silk. "He doesn't know I'm doing this for him. I would give every drop of my blood so he never has to feel the sting of a bullet. If he only knew. If he knew that I count the seconds until he comes home. That I cherish every memory, every time he almost touched me. I love that man in a way that scares me, Evelyn. I accept his hate, I accept his contempt, as long as he remains the king. If the price for him to live is for me to spend the rest of my life being touched by a monster like Julian, then so be it. I'm his. Have always been his. Even if I die today, my last thought will be the scent of sandalwood on his skin." She talked for nearly an hour, Evelyn. She detailed how she secretly sabotaged Julian's plans, how she planted evidence for the police to arrest Varga's henchmen. She was sacrificing everything. Her body, her heart, her reputation. And Mikhail. Mikhail heard every word, every sob, every desperate confession of love. Isabella was still sobbing, her face buried in the silk of her black veil, unaware that the air in the room had changed. She didn't know that miles away, in a darkened office overlooking the Black Sea, Mikhail Volkov was standing perfectly still. He had heard it all. He heard the way her voice broke when she said his name. He heard the confession of a love so deep it was willing to embrace the touch of a monster just to keep him breathing. For the first time in his life, the Iron King felt a crack in his chest. The betrayal he thought he felt, the poison that had been fueling his hatred for weeks, evaporated, replaced by a cold, surgical fury directed at Julian Varga. Mikhail didn't say a word to her. Not yet. He didn't want to alert her. He slowly reached out and picked up his phone, his knuckles white. He didn't hang up. He placed the phone in his pocket, keeping the line live, so he could hear every step she took toward that altar. He wanted to hear the moment he would save her. The hour had come. Julian Varga's men knocked on Isabella's door. "It's time, Mrs. Varga," one of them sneered. Isabella stood up. She wiped her tears, adjusted her black lace, and put on the mask of the cold, ambitious traitor once again. She walked down the grand staircase of Varga's estate, her heart feeling like a lead weight. The room was filled with the worst vultures of the underworld, men who would kill their own mothers for a percentage of the docks. At the end of the aisle stood Julian. He looked triumphant. He looked like a man who had finally stolen the crown jewel from his enemy's vault. As Isabella reached him, he leaned in and whispered, "You look beautiful in mourning, my dear. Because tonight, we bury the Volkov legacy for good." Isabella looked at him with empty eyes, her mind screaming Mikhail's name, unaware that Mikhail was already at the gates. The priest hadn't even finished the first sentence when the lights died. Not a flicker, a total absolute blackout. Panic erupted. Julian's guards reached for their weapons, but they were dancing with ghosts. Through the live line on her phone, Isabella heard a voice. It wasn't Julian's. It was a roar that seemed to come from the shadows themselves. "Get down!" It was Mikhail. He didn't come alone. He came with a shadow guard, the elite soldiers who only moved when the king demanded a massacre. Muzzle flashes lit up the room like strobe lights. In those flashes, Isabella saw him. Mikhail. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in tactical gear, his face smeared with grease and blood, looking like the god of war himself. He moved through the crowd with a terrifying grace, heading straight for the altar. Julian tried to pull Isabella in front of him as a shield, but Mikhail was faster. A single shot echoed, grazing Julian's shoulder and forcing him to release her. Mikhail grabbed Isabella by the waist, pulling her flush against his chest. For a moment the world stopped. The smell of sandalwood and gunpowder filled her senses. She looked up, trembling, and saw his eyes. They weren't ice anymore. They were fire. "You lied to me," he growled, his voice vibrating against her ribs. "I had to," she whispered, her voice failing. "I heard you, Isabella," he said, his grip tightening, possessive and absolute. "I heard every word you said to Evelyn. You thought you were saving me. You were wrong. You were just making me realize that I'd burn this entire city to the ground before I let another man touch what is mine." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned to his men, his voice returning to the cold command of the king. "Burn it. Burn everything Varga owns. Leave nothing but ash." He carried her out of that house of horrors as it began to go up in flames. He didn't take her home. He took her to the docks, to his private yacht, far away from the eyes of the families. The escape from Varga's estate was a blur of fire and adrenaline. But now, as the yacht sliced through the obsidian waters of the Black Sea, the silence was more deafening than the explosions. Isabella sat in the master cabin, still wearing that black lace dress, now torn at the hem and stained with the soot of a fallen empire. She wasn't a bride anymore. She wasn't a traitor anymore. It was nothing. A ghost waiting for judgment. The door opened. Mikhail walked in. He had washed the blood from his face, but his eyes still carried the storm. He didn't speak. He walked over to the bar, poured 2 glasses of his finest vintage, and sat across from her. He placed the smartphone, the one that had captured her soul, on the table between them. The screen was cracked, but the call history showed the truth that changed everything. Mikhail leaned forward, the shadows of the cabin making his features look like they were carved from granite. 48 minutes, Isabella, he said. His voice a low vibration that seemed to rattle her very bones. I listened to you for 48 minutes. I heard you describe the way I smell. I heard you confess that you'd let that piece of filth touch you just to keep me on my throne. Tell me, did you think I was so weak that I couldn't handle Julian Varga on my own? Isabella looked up, her eyes red from crying, but for the first time she didn't look away. It wasn't about your weakness, Mikhail. It was about my fear. You are king, yes. But to me, you are the man who gave me a reason to breathe when the world wanted me dead. Julian had proof. He had names. I couldn't risk a single percentage of a chance that you would end up in a grave. I would rather be hated by you and know you were alive, than be loved by you while I stood over your coffin. Mikhail stood up abruptly, slamming his glass on the table. The violence of the movement made her flinch. He walked over to her, grabbing the arms of her chair, pinning her in place. You stole my choice. He roared, and the pain in his voice was finally visible. You let me believe you were a snake. You let me say things to you. Cruel things. Things that I can never take back. Every time I looked at you these past weeks, I wanted to kill you and kiss you at the same time. You put me in a hell of my own making. The raw emotion of their confrontation was interrupted by a sound from below. A rhythmic thud. A muffled, pathetic scream. Julian Varga was not dead. Mikhail didn't believe in quick endings for those who touched what belonged to him. Mikhail took Isabella's hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip unyielding. He didn't ask, he led. He guided her out of the luxury of the cabin and down into the bowels of the yacht. The air down here was different, smelling of salt, diesel, and the metallic tang of fear. There, in a small, windowless hold, Julian Varga was chained to a support beam. He was a mess of torn silk and bruises. The king of chaos was now nothing more than a broken toy. He looked up, squinting against the harsh light, a bloody grin on his face. Still, the protective master, Julian wheezed, coughing up blood onto his white shirt. She's a liar, Mikhail. She'll always be a liar. She enjoyed the thought of my bed. She enjoyed the power I offered. Mikhail didn't even acknowledge Julian's existence. He looked only at Isabella. He reached into his holster and pulled out his silver-plated revolver. The weapon was heavy, cold, and beautiful. He placed it in Isabella's hand, his own hand covering hers, guiding her arm until the barrel was pointed directly between Julian's eyes. He threatened you, Mikhail whispered into her ear, his voice like silk and steel. He used your love for me as a weapon to humiliate you. He tried to take what is mine. In our world, Isabella, we don't wait for justice. Take it. Finish the story you started. Erase the man who dared to make you cry. Show him that a Volkov queen doesn't need a savior. She needs a target. The silence in the hold was absolute. Isabella felt the heat of Mikhail's body behind her, his heart beating against her back. She looked at Julian, the man who had made her life a living hell for months. She felt the trigger beneath her finger. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a swan. She was a predator. Bang. The sound was deafening in the small space. Julian Varga's head snapped back, and the light left his eyes forever. Isabella didn't flinch. She didn't drop the gun. She simply leaned back, letting Mikhail take the weight of her body as the smoke from the barrel curled around them like a shroud. They returned to the upper deck as the first fingers of dawn began to touch the horizon. The body of Julian Varga was consigned to the depths, a secret buried under miles of cold water. Mikhail took the revolver from her hand and replaced it with something else. A ring. Not a delicate diamond, but a heavy gold band bearing the Volkov crest, the mark of absolute ownership and protection. He slid it onto her finger, his eyes finally softening, though the intensity remained. "No more cages, Isabella," he said, his voice a low promise. "The world will think you disappeared. They will think you died with Julian. From this day forward you exist only for me. I heard everything on that phone. I know the depth of your devotion, and I will spend every breath I have making sure you never have to sacrifice yourself again. You are my queen, and this yacht my estates, my life. They are your fortress, but you will never leave my side again. Do you understand?" Isabella looked at the ring, then at the man she had almost died for. She realized then that she had traded one kind of cage for another. But as Mikhail pulled her into a kiss that tasted of wine and finality, she knew she didn't care. Mikhail kept his word. Isabella is safe. She lives in a world of unimaginable luxury, behind high walls and glass that can stop a sniper's bullet. She doesn't see the sun unless Mikhail is beside her. She doesn't speak to the world unless he approves. She is the most powerful woman in the underworld, and the most secluded. She called me one last time a few days ago. The call was short, monitored, but she sounded different. "Evelyn," she whispered. "The swan is dead. But the queen has never felt more alive. He knows my soul now. And there is no hiding from a man who knows exactly how much you love him. So, my dear listeners, be careful with your phones. Be careful with your secrets. Because in the dark, someone is always listening. And if that someone is a man like Mikhail Volkov, he won't just break your heart. He'll claim your entire existence." This was Evelyn. Sleep well. If you can. And keep your secrets close. Unless you want to be found. You never know who's on the other side.